Dad is about to get married for the second time, and turns out his bride-to-be is an entitled Bridezilla. Her first demand to me? Chop off the hair I spent years growing due to illness because she doesn't want me to overshadow her or her daughter on their special day. I immediately refuse her request, but now she's threatening to cancel the wedding altogether, and the entire family is calling me unreasonable because Dad is finally happy after a long time, and I'm not letting him have his moment for my ego. What happened 5 years ago? When I was 17, my life changed in ways I couldn't have imagined. 1 minute, I was a regular high school girl worrying about grades, friendships, and prom. And the next, I was in a hospital room grappling with an aggressive form of lymphoma. The diagnosis hit hard. I knew cancer was lifelong training, but until it became my reality, I never understood the sheer weight of it. The chemotherapy started almost immediately. I remember looking in the mirror every day watching as my hair thinned and then disappeared entirely. Losing my hair felt like losing a part of myself. It wasn't just about vanity. It was a symbol of what cancer was taking from me. The worst part of the whole ordeal, though, was knowing my mom was going through it with me. She was my rock, my anchor in a sea of uncertainty. She shaved her head in solidarity when I started losing mine, telling me that we'd be beautiful, bold or not. We were going to get through it together, but we didn't. My mom passed away during my last round of chemotherapy. Her death was unexpected, and it shattered me in a way that cancer never could. The only person who had been there for me through it all, who had promised we'd both have long, beautiful hair again, wasn't there to see me through the end of my treatment. I went into remission, but my mom didn't get to witness that triumph. After she died, I made a promise to her and to myself. I would grow my hair long and beautiful like we had always talked about. It would be a testament to everything we'd overcome together, even if she wasn't there to see it. It's been years since then, and my hair now reaches my lower back, thick, healthy, and a constant reminder of my journey. My hair is more than just hair. It's a symbol of resilience, of loss, of survival. It's something I will never take for granted because I know what it represents. My dad took my mom's death incredibly hard. He tried to put on a brave face for me, but I could tell that something inside him had broken. He threw himself into work, focusing on keeping me healthy and helping me rebuild my life after cancer. For years, it felt like delight had gone out of his eyes, like he was just going through the motions. But then, 2 years ago, he met Sarah through a mutual friend. At first, I was happy for him. Sarah seemed nice enough, and more importantly, she made my dad smile again. Seeing him come back to life after all those years of pain was heartwarming. It was like he'd finally found a reason to be happy again, and I was relieved. For a long time, I thought Sarah was good for him. She wasn't trying too hard to fit into our family, and she seemed to respect the fact that my dad had a history that included a lot of grief and healing. But as time went on, things started to shift. About 6 months ago, my dad proposed to Sarah. She said yes, and the wedding planning began. At first, I was excited. After everything my dad had been through, he deserved this happiness and I was more than willing to support him in whatever way I could. But then Sarah's true colors started to show, slowly at first, but unmistakably. Sarah has a daughter, Emma, who's 19. Emma's been standoffish with me since the beginning, but I didn't think much of it. I figured it was just the awkwardness of our families trying to merge and the fact that I was a little older. I never had any beef with her and I honestly hoped we could eventually find some common ground. But Emma always kept her distance and I let it go, chalking it up to the adjustment period. Things came to a head about a week ago when Sarah asked me to come over for what she called a wedding planning discussion. I thought it would be about dresses, flowers, or some other wedding-related detail, so I didn't think much of it. However, I should have known something was off when she insisted on meeting without my dad present. When I arrived, it was just Sarah and Emma sitting at the kitchen table with a binder full of wedding plans spread out in front of them. I sat down ready to hear what they had in mind, and that's when Sarah dropped a bomb on me. She calmly informed me that for the sake of the wedding's aesthetic, I needed to cut my hair significantly. She didn't ask, she told me. According to her, my long hair would overshadow both her and Emma on their special day. She wanted all the bridesmaids, including Emma and me, to wear identical updos, and apparently my hair length would ruin the overall look. I was stunned. I couldn't believe she was asking me to chop off the hair I spent 5 years growing, hair that had so much personal significance to me. I immediately refused. I tried to explain why my hair was important and how it was a promise I made to my mom, a symbol of everything I'd been through, but Sarah wasn't having it. She dismissed my explanation, telling me that I was living in the past and that I needed to move forward with my new family. The kicker? She had the audacity to say that my mom would want me to do this for my dad's happiness. That was when I lost it. How dare she use my mom to manipulate me? How dare she try to twist my mother's memory to get me to comply with something so shallow? I stood up and told her point blank that I wasn't cutting my hair. I wasn't going to change something so meaningful to me just to fit into her superficial vision of a perfect wedding. I left the house in tears, furious and hurt. Not even an hour later, my phone started blowing up. Sarah had called my dad in hysterics, telling him that I was being difficult and disrespectful. She threatened to cancel the wedding altogether, claiming she couldn't marry into a family where her wishes weren't respected. My dad called me, practically begging me to reconsider. He told me that Sarah was just stressed about the wedding and that I should try to be more accommodating. He said this was their special day and I was making it about myself. Now, I'm honestly regretting my actions. Was I being unreasonable? Was I really letting my pride get in the way of my dad's happiness? He's been through so much and he's finally found joy again. Who was I to take that away from him? But at the same time, the request Sarah was making wasn't just about hair. It was about me sacrificing a deeply personal part of myself for the sake of appearances. My aunts and uncles have started to weigh in too. They are calling and texting me, telling me I was being selfish and that after everything my dad had been through, I should be willing to make this small sacrifice for his happiness. To them, it was just hair. To me, it was so much more than that. It was my history, my pain, my mother's memory. The only person who seemed to understand where I was coming from was my best friend. She went through cancer treatment with me and knew exactly what my hair meant. She told me that Sarah was showing her true colors, that she was using the wedding as an excuse to control me and bend me to her will. She also said that my dad was too love-blind to see what was really going on, and I hated to admit it, but she was probably right. Still, watching my dad's happiness slip away felt unbearable. He has finally found someone who made him smile again, and now I was being painted as the villain. So, what would you guys say? Am I in the wrong? Should I cut my hair for my stepmother's happiness? Update 1. The past couple of days have been a whirlwind of emotions, chaos, and a constant stream of opinions from people both close to me and complete strangers. After my original post went viral, I was flooded with thousands of supportive messages. People from all over the world shared their stories of dealing with toxic family members, of standing their ground in the face of unreasonable demands. Reading through those messages gave me strength. It reminded me that I wasn't alone and that there were so many people who understood why I couldn't just give in. But while strangers offered their support, things at home spiraled out of control. The atmosphere with my dad and Sarah grew increasingly tense, and I knew it wasn't just going to blow over. Sarah took the passive-aggressive route, starting a family group chat that excluded me. In this chat, she painted herself as the innocent, caring future stepmother who only wanted a uniform and elegant look for the wedding. She told everyone that I was refusing to accept her and Emma as family, that I was the one being hostile and creating tension for no reason. Her version of events was infuriating, but even worse, it seemed to be working. The family group chat quickly turned into a support group for Sarah and her reasonable request. They were all rallying around her, telling her that I should be more accommodating, more understanding, and that it was just hair. I wasn't part of the conversation, but I heard about it from a cousin who sent me screenshots. My family was swallowing Sarah's story whole and I could feel their judgment hanging over me like a dark cloud. In the midst of all of this, my dad showed up at my apartment yesterday. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't say much at first, just sat down and pulled out an envelope filled with old photos of my mom and me. Photos of us laughing, of her holding me when I was a baby, and even a few from the days when I was going through chemo. It was clear what he was trying to do. He was hoping that the memories of my mom would soften me, that I'd feel guilty and decide to cut my hair for the sake of family peace. He told me that Mom would have wanted me to make sacrifices for the sake of family unity, that I should be willing to put aside my feelings to help everyone move forward. For a moment, I felt that familiar pang of guilt, the crushing weight of trying to balance honoring my mom's memory with my dad's happiness. But then something in me snapped. I went to my room and pulled out an old journal from my cancer days. I sat down next to my dad and opened it to a specific entry. It was the one where I had written down everything. Mom's promise about our hair, the nights we spent talking about the future, her final days, and the promise I made to her when she knew she wouldn't be there to see me through remission. I read it out loud to him, every word. After that, I showed him something else, screenshots of messages between Sarah and Emma. These weren't just any messages. They were sent to me by Sarah's niece, who's friends with Emma and had seen what was really going on behind the scenes. In these texts, Sarah and Emma were discussing how this whole situation was their chance to put me in my place, how they were sick of me being the focus of attention, and how Emma had always felt less than because of my hair. Emma had struggled with her thin hair for years and Sarah thought that this was the perfect opportunity to level the playing field. It wasn't about aesthetics. It was about power, control, and erasing the parts of my life that didn't fit into Sarah's narrative of a perfect blended family. When my dad read those messages, the color drained from his face. He didn't say much, but I could see the gears turning in his head, the realization settling in that Sarah wasn't just stressed about the wedding. This was deeper than that. He left my apartment in a daze, clutching the journal and the printed out screenshots. I didn't know what he was going to do next, but I could tell he was questioning everything. For the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, he was seeing the situation for what it really was. The next morning, my phone rang. It was my dad, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. He told me that he had confronted Sarah about the messages, hoping there was some kind of explanation or denial, but instead of owning up to her behavior, Sarah exploded. She didn't even try to deny it. She launched into a tirade about how Emma deserved to feel special on her big day and how I was a constant reminder of my dad's past life that needed to be left behind. She admitted that my hair length wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about how I took attention away from them. How the wedding photos would forever be a symbol of the old life she was trying to replace. Hearing all this was like a punch to the gut. Sarah wasn't just trying to control the wedding. She was actively trying to erase any trace of the life my dad had before her, and that included me. My dad, though, was still caught in the middle. He told me he didn't want to lose Sarah, but he also couldn't ignore the way she had manipulated the situation. He wanted us all to just get along, to somehow make peace, but I knew that wasn't possible anymore. There was no compromise to be made here. Every conversation with my dad felt heavier than the last. He was trying to play mediator, desperately clinging to the idea that we could all come together as one happy family. But it was clear that Sarah wasn't interested in that. She didn't see me as part of the family. She saw me as a threat, a reminder of everything that came before her, and she wanted me gone. My dad sounded more and more defeated with each conversation, asking me if there was any way I could just cut my hair for the wedding just to keep the peace. And every time I told him no, not because I didn't care about his happiness, but because this wasn't just about hair, it was about me standing up for who I am, for what my mom and I went through, and for the promises we made to each other. It hurt to see my dad so torn, but I knew I couldn't give in. Not now. Update 2. Hi, everyone. I can't believe how much has unfolded since my last update. The situation with my dad, Sarah, and the whole wedding mess has taken another turn. And, honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around everything. To start, the wedding has been postponed indefinitely. After my dad confronted Sarah with the evidence of her manipulations, things started to unravel quickly. At first, Sarah tried to backtrack, to claim that everything she was doing came from a place of love and concern. She said she was just trying to protect her daughter's self-esteem and that Emma's insecurities were at the heart of her request for me to cut my hair, but my dad didn't buy it anymore. The facade she had been keeping up for the past 2 years was crumbling fast, and with it, her grip on the narrative she'd been spinning. What truly shocked my dad and me was the discovery that Sarah had been systematically trying to erase any trace of my mom from our lives. My dad had been so wrapped up in planning the wedding and managing his emotions that he didn't notice what was happening right under his nose. Sarah had already packed up most of my mom's remaining belongings, photos, keepsakes, even the little trinkets my mom had left behind in the house into boxes. She claimed that she was helping my dad move on, but the truth was darker than that. It wasn't just about moving on from grief. It was about erasing my mom's presence entirely. To Sarah, my mom represented a past she couldn't control, and she wanted to wipe that slate clean. When my dad found out about this, it broke something in him. He'd been trying so hard to make this new chapter of his life work, to find happiness again after all the loss, but realizing that Sarah had been subtly pushing him to forget my mom, to rewrite the history of his life was too much. He told me he felt like he had been blind for so long, and now that he could finally see what was happening, he wasn't sure what to do. It was clear that Sarah's influence had seeped deeper than just the wedding. This was about power, about control, about remaking his life to suit her image of the future. The atmosphere in the house became unbearable. Sarah continued to dig in her heels, refusing to acknowledge any wrongdoing. She kept insisting that everything she'd done was for the good of the family to help us move forward. But with the wedding on hold, the tension between her and my dad grows worse by the day. She couldn't handle the fact that he wasn't falling in line anymore, and her frustration only deepened as more and more of the truth came to light. And then something unexpected happened. Emma, Sarah's daughter, reached out to me privately, and for the first time I saw a side of her I hadn't expected. She apologized, not just for her part in this whole hair debacle, but for how she had been treating me since the beginning. She admitted that she had been under her mother's farm for years, that Sarah had always been controlling and manipulative, especially when it came to appearances. Growing up with a mother like that had warped Emma's perspective on a lot of things, and she confessed that Sarah had convinced her that my hair, my presence, was a threat to her self-worth. Emma told me she had always felt insecure about her thin hair, and her mom had capitalized on that insecurity from a young age. Sarah had built up this idea in her mind that my long hair was a personal attack on Emma, something that made her feel less than whenever we were in the same room. It sounds ridiculous, but when you've been conditioned to think that way for so long, I can understand how she might have believed it. Emma said that at first, she didn't question her mom's motives because it was all she knew. this constant need to measure up, to be the center of attention in every room. But after seeing how things had spiraled out of control, she started to question everything. We had a very long conversation. Emma had lost her own dad when she was young, and while her relationship with her mom had always been strained, she had clung to her mother's approval because she didn't know where else to turn. But over the past few weeks, she had started to see Sarah's actions in a new light, especially after she found out about the messages her mom had sent plotting to put me in my place. For the first time, I felt like Emma and I were actually seeing each other as people, not as obstacles. She apologized for the way she had treated me, and I could hear the sincerity in her voice. It was like all the tension between us had evaporated in that one conversation. We talked about how hard it is to deal with loss, how much pressure we put on ourselves to meet expectations that were never ours to begin with. Emma even admitted that she had envied my relationship with my dad, something I hadn't expected to hear. In her eyes, I represented this unshakable bond with my dad, something she had never had with her own parents, and it had made her feel like an outsider. By the end of our talk, I didn't feel the same resentment towards Emma that I had before. I realized that she had been manipulated just as much as I had and that we were both victims of Sarah's attempts to control the narrative. I wouldn't say we're friends yet, but I think we're on the path to something better. There's a lot of healing to be done, but for the first time, I am optimistic about where things might go with Emma. As for my dad, he's been distant lately, trying to process everything. I know this has shaken him to his core, and he's struggling to figure out where to go from here. He doesn't want to lose Sarah, but he also can't ignore the damage she's caused. I can see the conflict in his eyes every time we talk. He's torn between his desire to move forward with his life and his loyalty to my mom's memory, and I don't think he knows how to reconcile those two things. For now, the wedding is on indefinite hold, and I'm not sure if it will ever happen. There's so much up in the air, and I think my dad is finally starting to see that this isn't just about me or my hair. It's about much deeper issues that have been festering for a long time. All I can do is wait and see what happens next. Update 3. Hi, people. How are you? It's hard to believe how much has happened in just a few short weeks. Everything feels different now. The last few days have been emotional, but in a way that feels healing. My dad and I had the conversation I've been waiting for, one that I didn't even realize I needed until it happened. We sat down together for hours talking openly about everything that had been building up between us. My dad admitted that he had been ignoring so many red flags with Sarah because he was terrified that if he lost his chance at happiness, he'd be alone forever. He told me that after losing my mom, there had been this emptiness. He didn't know how to fail. And when Sarah came along, it felt like a lifeline. He wanted to believe that by moving on and by starting a new chapter, he could somehow escape the pain that had haunted him since Mom passed away. But instead, he realizes now that he was just running from it. And in doing so, he pushed me into a corner trying to force me to sacrifice parts of myself, my hair, my memories, my connection to Mom, for his chance at happiness. It was a tearful conversation for both of us. He apologized for using my mom's memory against me and for trying to guilt me into a decision that wasn't mine to make. He told me how proud he is of me, not just for standing up to Sarah, but for staying true to myself even when the people around me were pressuring me to give in. He admitted that he needs help, real help, processing his grief, something he hasn't been able to fully do since Mom died. He's already made an appointment with a therapist, which is a huge step for him. For the first time in a long time, I feel like my dad is ready to face his grief, not just bury it under layers of distraction. Sarah, on the other hand, has shown her true colors in ways that none of us can ignore anymore. After the wedding was officially postponed, she's been bad-mouthing our family to anyone who will listen, claiming that we're all stuck in the past and obsessed with a dead woman. At first, hearing her say things like that made my blood boil, but now I just feel sorry for her. It's clear that Sarah is deeply insecure, and rather than confront her own issues, she's lashing out at the people around her. My dad is done with her now. He told me he couldn't see a future with someone who not only disrespected me, but also tried to erase my mom's presence from our lives. It's over between them, and while I know that hurts him, I can tell it's also a huge relief. What really surprised me though, is Emma. After our last conversation, she made a huge decision. She has decided to move out. She told me that this whole situation has opened her eyes to just how toxic her mom's behavior has been all these years. She's seen how manipulative Sarah can be, especially when it comes to controlling people's appearances and the way they present themselves. Emma is ready to set some boundaries of her own, and while we're not exactly best friends yet, I can tell she's genuinely trying to break free from her mom's shadow. I never expected to feel this, but I actually have hope that one day we might become close, not as stepsisters, but as two people who've come through a lot of shared struggles. As for me, this whole ordeal has brought up so many emotions I didn't even realize were still lurking under the surface. Losing my mom was the hardest thing I've ever gone through. And while I've done my best to honor her memory, This fight with Sarah made me realize I haven't fully processed my grief. I've scheduled an appointment with a therapist myself because as much as I've been strong, I think it's time to let myself be vulnerable too. There's no shame in asking for help, and I'm ready to confront those parts of myself that I've kept locked away for too long. In the meantime, I've decided to donate my hair, but not in the way Sarah or anyone else might have expected. I'm not cutting it all off. Instead, I found a charity that accepts small sections of hair for making wigs for children with cancer. It feels like the perfect way to honor my mom's memory while also helping others who are going through the same thing I did. My hair will stay long, but knowing that a piece of it is going to help someone else regain their confidence feels like the right way to close this chapter. And finally, my dad and I are planning a trip to the beach, Mom's favorite spot. It's something we've talked about doing for years but kept putting off, always finding one excuse or another. But now, after everything that's happened with Sarah and all the emotions that have been stirred up, we both know it's time to honor her in the way she deserves. That being said, we're not rushing into it. This trip won't be happening anytime soon because after all the upheaval and emotional chaos of the past few weeks, we both need some time to breathe. The trauma with Sarah has been like a whirlwind, and in the middle of all that, it's easy to forget that healing doesn't happen overnight. As much as we've come together through this experience, my dad and I also need some space from each other right now. Time to individually process everything that's happened and everything that still lingers beneath the surface. To everyone who's been following this story and offering advice and support, I can't thank you enough. You've helped me see that I'm not alone and that standing up for myself and my mom's memory wasn't selfish but necessary. Sometimes it takes a village to recognize and stand up to toxic behavior, and I am so grateful for every person who helped me and my dad see the truth.